Vela and I stood at the landing platform and watched the small shuttle descend through the clouds of Thesia Prime. She was the third daughter of the High Council, born into wealth and power that stretched back 10,000 years. And today she would meet the man she was forced to marry, a human. Her people ruled 1,000 worlds when humans were still living in caves and hunting animals with sharpened sticks. Now these newcomers had somehow pushed their way into galactic politics, and the Concordat demanded a symbolic union between the ancient Thesian Empire and the upstart species that refused to know its place. The shuttle landed with a soft hiss, and the ramp lowered slowly. Vela expected an entourage of guards and advisors and servants carrying gifts meant to impress her family. Instead, a single man walked down the ramp. He was average height by human standards, which made him short compared to the tall and elegant Thesians who stood waiting. His hair was dark with touches of silver at the sides. His eyes were quiet and seemed to take in everything without revealing anything in return. He wore simple clothes with no military decorations or family symbols or ceremonial weapons. Her brother Kale leaned close and whispered, with contempt in his voice, "This is what humanity sends us?" An insult wrapped in plain cloth. Vela said nothing, but she silently agreed. The human approached and bowed respectfully before speaking in a soft voice. "I am Thomas Chun, and I am honored to meet you, Lady Vela." His accent was strange, but his words were clear, and his manner was calm without being arrogant. Vela nodded and gave the formal greeting required by tradition, but nothing more. The wedding ceremony happened 3 days later in the grand hall of her family estate. Thousands of guests watched as Vela spoke the ancient vows that would bind her to this unremarkable human. Thomas spoke his own vows in a quiet voice that barely carried to the front rows. They were simple words about partnership and protection and growing together through whatever challenges might come. When tradition demanded that he present a gift to demonstrate his worth to her family, Thomas reached into his coat and produced a small wooden box. Inside were seeds. Just seeds. "They come from Earth," he explained, "and they grow in any soil and survive almost anything." Vela accepted the gift with the practiced smile of a diplomat, hiding her true feelings. Her mother would later call it adequate for a human, and her father would not mention it at all. In the months that followed, Thomas became like a ghost in the household. He rose early each morning and tended a small garden he had planted in the eastern courtyard. He spent long hours in the family archives, teaching himself Thesian history and language and customs with patient determination. He cooked meals from his homeworld and left them for Vela, without expecting anything in return. He never raised his voice or demanded attention or complained about the obvious disrespect shown to him by her family and the household staff. Her brother Kale called him tame and made jokes about keeping humans as pets. The servants learned to look through him as if he was not there. Vela called him husband only when formal occasions required it. She slept in separate chambers and spoke to him only when necessary, and counted the days until she could request an annulment based on incompatibility. She did not notice the calluses on his hands that spoke of years holding something heavier than garden tools. She did not notice how he always positioned himself between her and doorways when strangers were present. She did not notice that he never truly slept but only rested with one eye open. Even in the safety of the estate, she did not notice that whenever diplomats or merchants visited, wearing hidden weapons under their fine clothes, Thomas would somehow be standing exactly where he needed to be if trouble started. She noticed nothing at all because she had already decided what he was. Quiet meant weak. Simple meant stupid. Human meant inferior. One evening, 6 months after their wedding, Vela attended a formal dinner with representatives from the Volcar Syndicate. They were powerful traders who controlled shipping routes throughout the Outer Rim, and they had opposed the Human-Thesian alliance from the very beginning. The lead representative was a tall creature named Drenvok with cold eyes and a smile that never reached them. He spent the entire dinner making subtle insults about humanity. "Such a young species," he said with false sympathy, "still learning how to behave among their betters. They breed quickly, though," another syndicate member added. "Like vermin filling every available space." Vela watched Thomas throughout these comments. He sat quietly and ate his meal and showed no reaction at all. Drenvok noticed this and pushed harder. "Tell me, human, does it bother you to be so far from your own kind? Surrounded by species that evolved while your ancestors were still climbing trees?" Thomas looked up and met the syndicate representative's eyes. "I find that every species has its own strengths," he said in that same soft voice. "And wisdom lies in not underestimating anyone." Drenvok laughed, spoken like a creature trying to convince itself it matters. He turned to Vela and his smile grew wider. "My condolences on your marriage, Lady Soanai, but take comfort in knowing that humans rarely live very long in the wider galaxy." The words hung in the air like a threat, barely disguised as conversation. Vela expected Thomas to react with anger or fear or at least discomfort. Instead, he simply continued eating. Later that night, Vela found Thomas in his garden, kneeling among the earth plants that had somehow taken root in Thesian soil. "You should have said something," she told him. "You should have defended yourself." Thomas looked up at her with those quiet eyes. "Words rarely change minds that are already closed," he said. "And I have learned that the best response to those who underestimate you is patience." "Patience for what?" Thomas smiled, and for just a moment Vela saw something in his expression that she could not identify. For the moment when patience is no longer necessary. He returned to his garden, and Vela walked away, still certain that she had married a weak and simple man. She would learn the truth soon enough, because in the shadows of the galaxy, enemies were moving, and the quiet human in her garden was about to show her what humanity had been hiding all along. The Velkar Syndicate had tried everything to stop the Human-Thesian alliance. They had bribed politicians and sabotaged trade negotiations and spread lies about humans being disease carriers who would contaminate every world they touched. Nothing had worked, so they sent the Hollow Blades 12 assassins with bodies modified beyond natural limits and minds wiped clean of everything except the need to kill. They had murdered planetary governors and brought down entire dynasties. They had never failed a contract. The Hollow Blades came in the deep hours of the night when Thesian biology demanded sleep. They moved through the estate like smoke, disabling security systems and killing guards before anyone could raise an alarm. Servants died in their beds without ever waking. The head of household security had his neck broken while still reaching for his weapon. Within minutes, the path to Vila's chambers was clear. Vela woke to the sound of her door sliding open. For a moment she thought it was a servant bringing morning tea. But then she saw the shapes in the doorway. 3 figures stood against the dim emergency lighting. They were tall and wrong, moving with the mechanical smoothness of beings built for one purpose. Only Vela reached for the ceremonial blade that hung beside her bed. It was a weapon she had never trained with, a decoration meant to honor tradition rather than actually be used. Her hand closed around the handle, and she knew with terrible certainty that she was going to die then. Thomas was there. She had not heard him enter through the connecting passage between their chambers. She had not seen him move across the room. He simply appeared in the space between her and the assassins like he had always been there, and in his hand was a sword. It was not a Thesian blade with its crystalline edge and energy field enhancement. It was steel, plain and simple steel, the kind of metal that humans had been folding and sharpening for thousands of years. The First Hollowblade died before his enhanced reflexes could register the movement. Thomas cut from shoulder to hip in a single diagonal stroke that separated the assassin into two pieces that fell in different directions. The second and third attacked together, high and low, a coordinated assault that had killed opponents faster than any human could possibly be. Thomas stepped forward instead of back, moving into the attack rather than away from it, was suddenly too close for their longer weapons to be effective. His elbow crushed one assassin's throat with a sound like breaking branches. His blade opened the other from waist to chest in a rising cut that painted the wall behind them. 4 seconds from start to finish, 3 bodies on the floor. Thomas turned to look at her, and Vela saw her husband for the first time. His eyes were not empty or simple or weak. They were controlled, like a vast ocean of violence held back by a dam of perfect discipline. "Stay here," he said. It was not a request or a suggestion. It was a command from someone who expected to be obeyed. He moved into the corridor and disappeared into the darkness. And Vela heard the screaming begin. She should have stayed where he told her. She should have hidden and waited for help to arrive instead. She wrapped herself in a robe and followed the trail of bodies. The corridor outside her chambers held 2 more dead assassins. The stairs leading down to the main hall held 3 more, arranged in positions that suggested they had tried to surround someone and failed catastrophically. Central courtyard held the rest. 9 hollow blades had converged on Thomas Chun, confident that their numbers and their enhancements would overwhelm whatever luck had carried him through the first encounter. The fight had lasted less than a minute. Thomas stood in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by the dead, breathing slowly and evenly as if he had just finished a walk in his garden rather than killing 9 of the most dangerous assassins in the galaxy. His sword dripped moonlight, caught the blood on his hands and clothes and face. He looked like something from the old human stories. A warrior from an age when survival meant being better at violence than anything else. Vela stepped into the courtyard and her foot splashed in something wet. "Who are you?" she whispered. Thomas was quiet for a long moment before answering. "I am exactly who I said I was," he replied. "A human who came here to be your husband. Husbands do not do what I just watched you do." Thomas cleaned his blade with a cloth from his sleeve, his movements automatic and practiced. "I was a soldier before I was a husband, Vela. One of Earth's last true warriors from the old programs they do not teach about in schools or mention in diplomatic meetings." He looked at her with those controlled eyes. "When humanity reached the stars, we found that every other species had already claimed their place in the hierarchy, and there was no room for us at the table." He gestured at the bodies around him. "So we made room, not through words or treaties or appeals to fairness, but through the only thing humanity has ever truly mastered. Violence," Vela said. "Controlled violence," Thomas corrected her. "Purposeful and efficient and absolutely certain. The kind of violence that makes other species think twice before pushing us too far." He sheathed his sword. The galaxy needed to learn that the cost of destroying humanity would be higher than the cost of accepting us. And people like me were the ones who taught that lesson. "But you were so quiet," Vela said, still trying to match the gardener she had ignored for 6 months with the killer standing before her. "So peaceful. I was patient," Thomas said with a sad smile. "There is an important difference." He walked toward her and stopped just close enough to speak softly. "The Syndicate sent these assassins tonight, and they will send more when they learn this group has failed. Perhaps soldiers next time, or a fleet. Or something worse. What do we do?" Thomas studied her face as if measuring something. "That depends on you, Vela. You can walk away from this marriage and let your family find some way to make peace with the Syndicate. Or you can stand beside me and face whatever comes next." Vela thought about everything she had believed about humans. She thought about the quiet man who had tended his garden and cooked her meals and never complained. About being treated like furniture. She thought about the warrior who had just killed 12 enhanced assassins with a sword made of simple steel. "Teach me," she said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Teach you what?" "How to fight, how to protect myself, how to be something more than a political decoration waiting to be rescued." For the first time since she had met him, Thomas smiled with genuine warmth. "Are you certain? The training is hard, and the knowledge changes you in ways you cannot undo." Vela looked at the bodies around them and then back at her husband. "I am the third daughter of the High Council, and tonight I learned that everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong." She met his eyes without flinching. "I want to be strong for real this time." Thomas nodded and took her hand. "Then we begin tomorrow. But for now, we need to alert your family and prepare for what comes next." He led her out of the courtyard, full of corpses, and into a future neither of them could fully predict behind them. The earth flowers in his garden continued to grow, spreading their roots through Thesian soil, adapting and surviving just like the humans who had planted them. The security footage spread across the galaxy within 3 days. Every species in the Concordat watched a single human dismantle 12 hollow blade assassins with nothing but an ancient steel sword and his bare hands. Military analysts studied every frame and argued about techniques they could not identify. Combat academies rewrote their training programs to account for threats they had never considered. The Velkar Syndicate watched the footage too, and they were not pleased. High Commander Dremvok stood before the Syndicate Council and made his case for escalation. "One human got lucky," he argued. "That proves nothing about their species as a whole. Lucky 12 times in a row?" Another council member asked with doubt in her voice. "The hollow blades were overconfident, and they paid for it. But a proper military response will end this matter permanently." The council voted to send a fleet 3 dreadnoughts, 40 support vessels, and enough soldiers to conquer a small planet. They positioned themselves in orbit above Thesia Prime and broadcast their demands to the world below. Surrender the human called Thomas Chun for crimes against Syndicate citizens, or face the consequences of defiance. The Thesian High Council convened an emergency session. Vela's father, Lord Kelver Sornai, spoke first with the caution of a man who had survived many political storms. "We cannot fight the Syndicate fleet," he said. "The mathematics are simple, and they favor our enemies. The humans started this conflict," Vela's brother added. "Let them finish it by giving up their criminal." "He is my husband," Vela said, rising from her seat, "and he saved my life while your precious security forces died in their sleep." "One human cannot matter more than our entire civilization," her father replied. "One human is not what you think he is." Vela walked to the central display and activated a holographic projection. Star maps appeared, showing the expansion of human territory over 3 centuries. Battle records followed, displaying conflicts that most species preferred to forget. "In 300 years," Vela said, "humanity went from a single planet to a recognized galactic power that nobody wants to fight directly." She highlighted specific engagements. They fought the Krix hegemony to a standstill when the Krix outnumbered them 50-1. Another highlight: they broke the Merchant Prince's monopoly on faster-than-light drives by capturing technology that was supposed to be impossible to steal. Another highlight: they ended the Scourge War when every other species had already accepted defeat. She turned to face the council. "The Velkar Syndicate has never fought humans directly, and do you know why? Because every species that has fought humans directly no longer exists as a military power." "Exaggeration," her brother scoffed. "Human propaganda designed to intimidate. Is it?" The voice came from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. Thomas stepped into the light, and he was not alone. Behind him came a dozen other humans, emerging from doorways and alcoves and servant passages where no one had noticed them. There was the gardener from the Eastern Estate, an old woman who had tended flowers for 20 years. There was the merchant who sold spare parts at the spaceport, a young man with a friendly smile. There was the cook from the council's own kitchen, a middle-aged woman who had prepared meals for Vela's family for a decade. Each of them moved with the same controlled stillness that Thomas carried. Each of them had the same quiet eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. There are humans on every major world in this sector, Thomas said. Unremarkable people living unremarkable lives, waiting for the moment when they are needed. He walked forward until he stood before the council. The syndicate has no idea how many of us there are because we designed it that way. And neither do you. You are saying that humans have been spying on us for years. Lord Sornai demanded. I am saying that humans have been protecting you for years, Thomas corrected him. And you never noticed because protection works best when no one knows it exists. He looked at each council member in turn. Earth remembers every species that tried to destroy us. And we remember how they fought and how they thought and how they died. And we have spent 3 centuries making sure that if anyone tries again, the cost will be too high for them to pay. What cost? Vela's brother asked with contempt that was beginning to crack. Thomas smiled. And it was not a friendly expression. The Hollowblades were supposed to be the best assassins in the galaxy, and I killed them with a sword that my grandfather made by hand 200 years ago. He let that sink in. The Syndicate fleet in orbit has 4,000 crew members. And right now there are humans serving on every single one of those ships. You are bluffing. Drenvok's voice came through the communication system. We screened all our personnel. You screened for weapons and for criminal records and for obvious threats, Thomas replied. You did not screen for patience or for loyalty or for the willingness to wait years for a single moment that might never come. He turned back to the council. The Syndicate is testing your resolve. And if you surrender me, they will demand more tomorrow and more the day after that. Because that is how predators work. What would you have us do? Lord Sornai asked. Let me stop them. How can one human stop a fleet? Thomas gestured at the humans standing behind him. I told you. Lord Sornai, there is more than one human involved. He walked to the main display and brought up a tactical readout of the Syndicate fleet. The flagship has a human engineer in its reactor section who has been waiting 3 years for authorization to act. He highlighted another ship. The command cruiser has a human communications officer who can make their entire network say whatever we want it to say. More highlights, more ships, more humans hiding in plain sight. This is not a bluff. This is a demonstration of what humanity does when we decide that a threat needs to be eliminated. The council sat in stunned silence. Finally, Vela's father spoke. If you can do what you claim, why tell us? Why not simply act and present us with the result? Thomas turned to look at Vela, and his expression softened. Because my wife asked me to give her people a choice. And I love her enough to respect that request. Vela felt something shift in her chest at those words. The choice is simple. Thomas continued. You can surrender me and hope the Syndicate is satisfied. Or you can trust me and watch what happens when humanity stops being patient. Lord Sornai looked at his daughter. What do you say, Vela? You know this human better than any of us. Vela thought about the garden and the meals and the quiet presence that she had ignored for so long. She thought about the warrior who had saved her life without hesitation. She thought about the man who had taught her to hold a sword and never once made her feel weak for not knowing how. I say we trust my husband, she answered. And I say that the Syndicate is about to learn why the galaxy should never underestimate humans. Thomas nodded and turned to face the communication display, where Drenvok waited for an answer. You wanted Thomas Chun? He said with that quiet voice that now carried the weight of centuries of human survival. Come and take him. High Commander Drenvok received the human's response and felt something he had not experienced in decades, uncertainty. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Void Hammer, and stared at the communication display where Thomas Chun's face had just disappeared. Arrogant creature, his second-in-command muttered. Does he think words will stop our fleet? No, Drenvok said slowly. I think he believes actions will. He turned to his sensor officer. Scan all ships for anomalies. Anything unusual in the past hour. Commander, we performed a full diagnostic this morning, and everything was... Do it again. The officer hesitated for just a moment before. Compline Drenvok walked to the tactical display and studied the formation of his fleet. 3 dreadnoughts in a triangle pattern. Support vessels filling the spaces between them. Enough firepower to reduce Thesia Prime to ash if necessary. It should have felt like strength instead. It felt like standing in a room full of shadows where any darkness might hide a blade. The sensor officer's voice came through with a slight tremor. Commander, I am detecting unusual power fluctuations in the reactor section of the Void Hammer. What kind of fluctuations? I cannot identify them, sir. They are within acceptable parameters, but the pattern is unlike anything in our database. Drenvok felt the uncertainty grow colder. Lock down the reactor section and send the security team to investigate. Yes. Commander, the order had barely been given when the lights flickered. Not a failure, just a flicker. So brief that it might have been imagination. But Drenvok had commanded warships for 40 years, and he knew that systems did not flicker without reason. Report, he demanded. All systems nominal. Commander, the flicker appears to have been a minor power redistribution. Appears to have been. The computer logs show nothing unusual. Another flicker. Longer this time. Then the main display changed without anyone touching it. Thomas Chun's face appeared again. But this time, he was not in the council chamber. He was standing in a corridor that Drenvok recognized immediately. It was aboard the Void Hammer itself. Hello again. Commander, Thomas said with that infuriating calm voice. I wanted to show you something before we continue. The image shifted to show the reactor section of the flagship. A human woman in engineering coveralls stood beside the main power coupling. Her hands resting casually on controls that could turn the entire ship into an expanding cloud of debris. This is Sarah, Thomas said. She has been your chief reactor technician for 3 years, and she is very good at her job. The image shifted again to show the bridge of the command cruiser. The second largest ship in the fleet, a human man sat at the communication station, smiling and waving at the camera. This is Marcus. And right now he has complete control over every communication system in your fleet. More images followed. A human in the weapons bay of a support vessel. A human in the navigation center of a troop transport. A human in the medical bay of the supply ship. Dozens of humans scattered throughout the syndicate fleet like seeds planted in fertile soil. You screened for obvious threats, Thomas said. But humans do not need weapons to be dangerous, Commander. We only need patience and opportunity. Drenvok found his voice. If your people sabotage my ships, thousands of innocent crew members will die. Yes, Thomas agreed. That would be terrible. Which is why I am giving you a choice instead of simply acting. The main display showed a single document. This is a withdrawal order for your entire fleet, signed by you and transmitted to the Syndicate Council, explaining that the military option is no longer viable and recommending diplomatic solutions instead. I will never sign such a thing. Then Sarah will disable your reactor and Marcus will BROADCAST surrender orders to your entire fleet, and every human on every ship will do whatever is necessary to end this threat permanently. Thomas's expression did not change, but his voice grew harder. I have already killed 12 of your best assassins with a sword, Commander. Do you really want to test what my people can do with actual resources? Drenvok looked at his bridge crew. He saw fear in their eyes. the sudden terrible understanding that they had been surrounded by enemies from the moment this operation began. How long? He asked quietly. How long have humans been doing this? Since we first reached the stars and discovered that no one wanted us here, Thomas replied. 3 centuries of placing our people in positions where they could protect humanity's interests without anyone noticing. Why reveal it now? Because the time for hiding is over, Commander. The galaxy needs to understand what we are and what we are capable of, so that conflicts like this one never happen again. Thomas stepped closer to whatever camera was recording him. Humans do not want war. We have seen too much of it on our own world, and we know the cost better than most species can imagine. But we will not be pushed to extinction by those who think we are too young or too weak to defend ourselves. He let the words hang in the air, signed the withdrawal order. Commander, take your fleet home and tell the Syndicate Council that the Human-Thesian Alliance is not to be tested again. And if I refuse? Then this conversation becomes a historical record of the moment you chose to sacrifice your entire fleet for nothing. Drenvok stood in silence for a long moment. He thought about his crew and their families. He thought about the humans hiding throughout his ships, waiting with that terrible patience for orders to return. Fleet into chaos. He thought about the footage of Thomas Chun killing 12 hollow blades with movements too fast and precise to seem real. The Syndicate had built its power on intimidation and the threat of violence, but humans, it seemed, had mastered violence itself in ways the galaxy had forgotten were possible. Give me the document, Drenvok said finally. His second-in-command stared at him in shock. Commander, you cannot be serious. The Council is not standing on a ship full of human saboteurs. Drenvok interrupted. I am making a tactical decision based on available information. He walked to the communication station and placed his command seal on the withdrawal order. There, he said to Thomas. You have what you wanted, not what I wanted. Thomas corrected him. What was necessary to prevent unnecessary death? Is there a difference? Yes, Commander, and someday you might understand it. The communication ended and the main display returned to normal. Drendov looked out at the stars and the planet below, where a quiet human had just changed the balance of power in the entire sector. Begin withdrawal. Procedures, he ordered. Yes, Commander. As the fleet began to move away from Thesia Prime, Drenvok allowed himself one final thought. The humans had been hiding among other species for 3 centuries. Learning and watching and waiting. What else had they learned that the galaxy did not know about yet? The question haunted him all the way home. 1 year after the Syndicate fleet withdrew from Thesia Prime, the galaxy looked very different. The Velkar Syndicate had fractured into competing factions, each blaming the others for the humiliation above Thesia. Their reputation for invincibility had been shattered by a species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers, and other powers were quick to take advantage of the weakness. The Human-Thesian Alliance had grown into something larger. 6 more species had requested formal partnerships, recognizing that standing beside humanity was safer than standing against them. Trade routes that had once been controlled by Syndicate intimidation now flowed freely through new channels and on Thesia Prime. In the garden of the Sornai estate, Vela knelt in the soil beside her husband and helped him plant new seeds. The council wants to hold another ceremony, she said, brushing dirt from her hands. Something to commemorate the anniversary of your famous victory. Thomas continued his work without looking up. It was not my victory, he said. Sarah and Marcus and all the others took the real risks while I talked on communication screens. You killed 12 assassins in my bedroom. That was just violence, Thomas replied. The victory was convincing the Syndicate to leave without anyone else having to die. Vela watched him work and marveled at how much had changed in a single year. The Pumdikus quiet human she had married out of political obligation had become the most respected figure on her world. Ambassadors requested audiences with him, and military commanders sought his advice, and children in schools learned about his deeds in their history lessons. But Thomas himself had not changed at all. He still tended his garden every morning. He still cooked meals from earth and left them for her without expecting thanks. He still spoke softly and moved carefully and treated everyone around him with the same patient respect. The only difference was that now Vela understood what all of it meant. My father wants to name you to the High Council, she said. Thomas finally looked up, and there was something like alarm in his expression. I am not a politician. You are the most effective diplomat this world has ever seen. Threatening people with hidden saboteurs is not diplomacy. It worked better than anything the actual diplomats tried. Thomas shook his head and returned to his planting. I came here to be a husband, not a hero. And I would like to return to that role if the galaxy will let me. Vela moved closer and put her hand over his. What if I want both? What if I want the husband who makes me breakfast and the hero who saves my life when assassins come? Thomas turned his hand over and interlaced his fingers with hers. Then you have both, he said simply. You have always had both. You just did not see it before. I was blind. You were raised to see humans as lesser beings. And it is hard to look past the things we learn as children. That is very forgiving of you. Forgiveness is easier than holding on to anger, Thomas said. And I have seen what anger does to people, and to nations, and to entire species. He stood and pulled her up with him, both of them covered in soil and sweat, and somehow more content than either had been in years. The humans who served on the syndicate ships are coming home next month, he said. I would like to host a celebration for them here in the garden if that is acceptable. They saved our world, Vela replied. I think they deserve more than a garden party. They would not want more than a garden party, Thomas said with a small smile. We are a simple people at heart, despite what the galaxy now believes about us. Vela thought about everything she had learned in the past year. Humans were indeed simple in some ways. They valued family and food and the company of friends. They planted gardens and raised children and told stories around fires, just like every other species in the galaxy. But beneath that simplicity was something else, a core of steel that had been forged by millions of years of surviving on a world that seemed determined to kill them. Every human carried that steel inside them, hidden beneath soft smiles and gentle words, waiting for the moment when gentleness was no longer enough. The galaxy had finally seen that steel, and it would never forget. Thomas, Vela said as they walked back toward the house. Do you regret any of it? Revealing what humanity has been doing all these years. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. The secrecy protected us when we were weak, he finally said. But we are not weak anymore. And secrets become prisons if you keep them too long. He looked up at the sky where syndicate ships had once threatened everything he cared about. Now the galaxy knows what we are and what we can do. And that knowledge will prevent more conflicts than any hidden network of operatives ever could. You think fear is better than secrecy? I think respect is better than both, Thomas replied. And respect requires understanding, and understanding requires truth. They reached the door of the estate, and Thomas paused to look back at his garden. Earth flowers bloomed beside Thesian plants in an impossible mix that should not have worked but somehow thrived. Different species from different worlds, growing together in shared soil, each making the other stronger. That is what I really wanted, Thomas said softly. Not for humanity to dominate the galaxy, but for us to find our place in it alongside everyone else. Vela followed his gaze and understood. The seeds you gave me on our wedding day. They grow in any soil and survive almost anything, Thomas quoted his own words from over a year ago. Just like humanity, and just like this alliance we have built. He took her hand again. The galaxy is large and dangerous and full of species who do not trust each other. But every garden starts with a single seed planted in hope. Vela looked at her husband, the quiet human who had changed everything simply by being exactly who he was. "I love you," she said, and meant it more than she had ever meant anything. Thomas smiled with that warmth she had once mistaken for weakness. "I know," he said. "I have known since the night you asked me to teach you how to hold a sword. Why did you not say anything?" "Because love, like everything else worth having, grows best when you give it time and patience." They walked into the house together, leaving the garden to bloom behind them, somewhere among the stars. Other humans continued their quiet work on distant worlds, living unremarkable lives and waiting for moments that might never come, but they waited with hope now instead of fear, because the galaxy had finally learned what humanity had always known, that the quietest people often carry the strongest steel, and that seeds planted with patience can grow into forests that shelter entire worlds. The story of Thomas and Vela would be told for generations, not as a tale of war and violence, but as a reminder that true strength comes from knowing when to fight and when to nurture. And in gardens across the galaxy, earth flowers continued to bloom in alien soil, proof that some things can grow anywhere if given the chance. Humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as gardeners, planting seeds of change wherever they went, and the harvest was only beginning.